clot to bust like a stroke. It eludes any single self-evident image. As Mr. P showed me, in order for most pictures of diabetic sugar to mean much at all, you need to know something about their before and after, in time and place. Yet traces of diabetes were everywhere in Belize, once people taught me to pay attention to the quiet, constant presences that so many lived with. I began to glimpse the negative spaces of what was missing. Bodies that sometimes slowly stopped healing. Potent medicines and devices that sometimes slowly stopped working. Specters of life-saving technologies that existed somewhere else in the world. Memories of former vegetable gardens and lost homelands. Loved ones changing photograph albums. Missing limbs, failing organs. An empty dress left hanging to outline an absence. I didn't know how to read those signs when I first walked Belize's southern coast, observing what washed up along the tide line. But like my interviews about the health of people and places, the tide arriving from the deep ocean presented a knot of entwined lives I didn't know how to untangle. The last nylon strings of ghost nets that now make up half of the ocean's plastic debris, long abandoned by fishermen, but still catching life until they unravel. Curds of broken styrofoam and clotted algae, hunks of dying coral from the heat-bleached reef, thin, gleaming strips of brown seaweed that looked as if they'd been unspooled from the reels of an old cassette tape. Odds were that most of the bright microplastic shards had once been food containers, perhaps ejected from passing cruise ships decades ago in order to be worn down to such confetti-sized slivers. I watched as local women deftly swept the day's debris from their stretch of beach, treating the sand underfoot like the floor of a well-tended kitchen. Shorelines. These are some of the shorelines of sugar to which the stories ahead will keep returning. On a nearby wooden porch worn gray by brooms and sand, I used to sit sometimes with Crescencia and her Aunt Dee in the afternoon when it was too hot to walk anywhere. They would laugh about how I looked even whiter when sweating out beads of sunblock and invite me to stretch with them along the steps, trying to catch a little breeze from the sea. Dee liked to show me the latest foil punch card of tablets from her small bucket of sugar pills, an old joke that stayed funny both because they were pills for her sugar and because she honestly could never tell whether the clinic's diabetes medications were working better than a placebo. Crescencia had stopped taking insulin injections for carefully weighed reasons after the hospital had last given her up for dead. But from the porch you could see the tree where a meal of lavish garifuna dishes had once been buried in the sand as part of an emergency chugu. Offerings for the ancestral spirits who had revived her from what her physicians were certain would be an irreversible coma. Not far from there, on a sunny, overgrown highway parallel to the coast, a teenager with type 1 diabetes named Jordan used to walk in a determined half-delirium, trying to reach the hospital before diabetic ketoacidosis set in. It was also along this coastline that a legendary healer with diabetes named Dareni used to send me with a tub to hang her sopping laundry after we finished at the washboard, little chores that were part of the daily test and price of being an old midwife student. If I didn't use enough extra clothespins for her heaviest shirts to stay on the line in the stiff sea wind, she would snap at me, American. And I was not allowed to ask her any more questions for the night. Somewhere far across this water lay the sugar islands from which her ancestors had come, and toward which this story will slowly wend back in trying to understand the sugar now rising in her family's bodies. It was also in Areni's seaside kitchen where I met her daughter, Guillerma, when she was hoping to receive dialysis to clean her blood, even though such intricate technologies from abroad were nearly impossible to procure at that time, much less maintain. Some of these friends have thrived for many years past medical predictions. Other people I knew dealt with limbs that eroded from diabetic sugar and eventually required amputation. Many of their heaviest losses happened between my irregular trips back. Although, over the past decade, I have also known many people whose injuries were painstakingly mended. Most everyone in Belize has somehow witnessed the long list of strange ravages caused by diabetes. Blindness, renal failure, bone disease, deadened nerves and numb limbs. Pain shooting through limbs or stinging like needles. Hunger that did not stop when you ate. Thirst